When the last wall fell, the queen did not scream. She watched in silence as embers rolled across the marble floor, drifting like dying stars across the ruins of her palace. Outside, the city that once bowed to her name now choked under smoke and dust. Soldiers marched through streets she had walked since childhood, marking doors, dragging men from hiding, extinguishing the final pieces of resistance. But the queen remained standing. She knew what came next. Her ancestors had told these stories in hushed tones, not to frighten their daughters, but to prepare them. The fall of a kingdom rarely ended with death, it ended with marriage. Two foreign officers entered the throne room. Their armor glinted with torchlight. One carried a scroll, the other carried shackles. Both bowed shallowly, not with respect but with routine. "Your life is spared," the translator said. "The Khan offers you a place in his household. You will be treated according to your status." According to your status, a phrase sharpened by centuries of conquest. The queen inhaled once, slowly. She knew this was not mercy. This was procedure, a political burial. Her life would continue, but her dynasty would end tonight. As they led her out, she passed through one final archway. Above it hung the royal crest of her family, burned and splitting at the edges. She touched it as she walked, tracing the lines she had memorized as a child. This would be the last time anyone saw her as the queen of this city. Soon she would become something else entirely. And if you pause the story here, it almost looks as if her fate is sealed. But what the conqueror did not know, what history rarely records, is that some queens did more than endure captivity. Some learned to rule from the shadows. This is her story, and the story of countless women erased by conquest, until now. To destroy a kingdom, you burned its banners. To erase it forever, you married its queen. Across the Mongol, Timurid, and Mughal worlds, marriage was not a union, it was a weapon. The chronicles wrote it politely. Joined the household, entered the harem, taken into the royal family. But everyone understood the truth. These were not negotiations, these were verdicts. Kings conquered cities with soldiers, emperors conquered futures with wives. A queen carried legitimacy. She embodied ancestry, alliance, and the spiritual identity of a people. If she remarried, especially to her enemy, the dynasty she came from dissolved into the bloodstream of the new ruler. This was not romance, it was policy. And it was older than Mongolia, older than Persia, older than India. Steppe warrior tribes used it long before empires learned to write history. When a clan was defeated, its noble women were taken as wives, so the victors could inherit not just livestock and territory, but lineage, memory, and claim. A child born from a conquered queen was a political weapon, part hostage, part symbol, part proof of submission. This was the cruel efficiency of empire. No need to massacre a royal family when you could erase them through marriage. But for the women forced into these unions, the suffering went far beyond politics. Imagine being a queen whose name carried divine meaning, now forced to bow at a foreign court. Imagine losing not only your home, but your language, your attire, your rituals. Imagine watching your mother tongue fade from your children's mouths, replaced by the conquerors. This wasn't just conquest of land, it was conquest of identity. And our queen, the one whose city fell tonight, knew all of this. She had read the stories of princesses taken by Genghis Khan's sons. She knew how Timur paraded noble women as symbols of victory. She knew how Mughal princes used royal wives to legitimize rule over new territories. She knew what her fate was supposed to be, but what she did not yet realize was that she would refuse to follow the script, because although the conqueror expected her to disappear into the machinery of empire, she would do something far rarer. She would learn how that machinery worked, then bend it toward her will. And this was the first quiet truth she understood in captivity. Empires rise through violence, but they are maintained through women. The queen's journey began the same way thousands of conquered women's journeys began. On horseback, bound, surrounded by soldiers who neither spoke her language nor cared to. She did not cry, she observed. Mongol warfare was precise, efficient. A storm with no wasted motion. Yet behind their brutality lay a surprisingly rigid political structure, one built around women far more than foreigners ever realized. And as she entered the conquerors' vast camp, she saw something that startled her. Women moved freely. Noble women, elder matriarchs, war brides, daughters of defeated tribes, all walking between tents with authority and purpose. Mongol society, unlike many empires, gave women administrative power. They managed wealth, oversaw logistics, negotiated alliances, even influenced military decisions. This was the first opening, a crack in the door of captivity. Because if Mongol women could wield power, so could a conquered queen if she learned their world. Her first lessons came silently. She watched senior wives speak beside the Khan during councils. She watched mothers of princes control herds, caravans, and trade networks. She saw how royal women managed the flow of tribute, the movement of people, the distribution of plunder. She realized that marriage into the Khan's household was not simply degradation. It was placement, a position, a chance. This didn't make it humane. It wasn't. She still slept in a foreign tent. She still bowed where she once commanded. She still carried the weight of a lost city in every breath. But she also discovered something unexpected. Mongol hierarchy respected competence more than birth. And competence she had. Meanwhile, she learned the darker truth of how Mongols used marriage as policy. Royal women from defeated kingdoms were brought not only to break resistance, but to bind the conquered people into the empire. Once their queens were absorbed, their tribes had no lineage to rally behind. Rebellion became rootless. This was the brilliance and cruelty of Mongol strategy. Turegina Khatun, once a captive herself, had risen to rule the empire after Ogedei Khan's death. She governed armies, managed succession, and shaped diplomacy across Eurasia. If a captive woman could rise that far, then fate was not fixed, and if fate was not fixed, then neither was hers. But to climb in the Mongol world, she would need to do something far harder than survive. She would need to become useful. So she watched, she learned, she adapted, not out of loyalty, not out of acceptance, but because she understood the truth. Conquest takes your home, but survival gives you time, and time is where power grows. And the conqueror, the man who had taken her city, had no idea that the quiet, regal woman seated among his new wives was studying the empire with a mind far sharper than he imagined. He thought he had gained a prize. In reality, he had invited an intelligence into his court that would one day learn to maneuver around him and beyond him. Her rise would not be swift. Power never is. But the seeds had been planted. And Mongol women watching her closely recognized something familiar. Not submission, but potential. When the Khan died unexpectedly, the empire fractured into competing factions. The queen, now a widow by force, was transferred to the household of a Timurid general, as was customary when a powerful Mongol lineage splintered. Another marriage, another empire, another version of captivity. But this time, she wasn't walking in blind. Timurid courts were different from Mongol camps. They were grand, perfumed, and suffocatingly political. Here, women were displayed more than empowered. Their beauty signaled dominance. Their presence signaled victory. A captured queen became a Timurid ornament, a demonstration to rivals that even royalty bowed to Timurid's bloodline. But Timurid harems were not simply spaces for pleasure. They were bureaucratic engines. Within the walls of silk and incense, women controlled the treasury, the flow of gifts, foreign envoys, the daily rhythm of the court, and the upbringing of future rulers. The queen quickly learned that power here was not loud. It was quiet, hidden, subtle. The women who ruled the Timurid world didn't do it from thrones. They did it from cushions at the back of the room, from whispered instructions to eunuchs, from strategic silences and perfectly timed conversations. This was not the power of swords, it was the power of influence, and this was where the queen thrived. She knew how to read people, she always had. Back in her own kingdom she had advised generals, softened disputes, and navigated court tensions with the skill of someone born to rule. Now she used those same talents in her new world. She learned the names of every servant, every guard, every wife, every concubine. She listened to gossip, but more importantly, she learned who started it. She memorized which generals were loyal, which princes were impulsive, which advisors drank too much, which wives were insecure. Information became her armor. No one in that harem imagined she was planning anything. Why would they? She was a prisoner wrapped in silk. But quietly she became the woman everyone turned to for guidance. A wife asked her how to calm the temper of her husband, a Timurid prince. A concubine sought her advice on navigating jealousy within the harem. A eunuch asked her counsel on protecting a young heir from a dangerous uncle. Every time she offered help, every time she gained loyalty. This was the rise of the shadow ruler. Meanwhile, she studied the history of Timurid women, especially those who had changed the fate of entire cities. She learned about Sarai Mulk Khanum, the noble princess, who had shaped Timurid policy behind the scenes. She learned how wives and mothers had staged palace coups, influenced succession, and even orchestrated assassinations. Women here were underestimated, and underestimation was opportunity. Still, the queen carried grief like a second skin. She thought of her city often, its gardens, its mosaics, the river that split the capital in two. But grief that cannot be acted upon becomes strategy, and she transformed hers into focus. She did not want revenge through violence. Violence had already taken enough. She wanted something greater, influence over the very empire that had destroyed her world, and she was closer than anyone realized. Power does not arrive suddenly. It gathers slowly, like storm clouds. The queen's transformation accelerated the day a Timurid prince fell gravely ill. Physicians failed. Advisors panicked. The court whispered that the succession crisis could ignite civil war, but she acted calmly. Drawing from remedies used in her homeland, she stabilized the prince's fever. When he woke, delirious but alive, he clung to her hand with gratitude. Word spread. Servants whispered her name with respect. Generals bowed lower when she passed. Even the prince's own mother looked at her with a mixture of shock and awe. For the first time, she was not invisible. The Timurid ruler, hardened by decades of war, summoned her privately. He expected a trembling captive. Instead, she met his eyes without fear. "You saved my son," he said. "I saved the heir of an empire," she replied. That was the moment he understood she was not like the others. This single act rewired the entire court's perception. Suddenly, she wasn't just a conquered queen, she was a political asset, someone whose insight, poise, and intelligence could be used. The ruler began seeking her counsel, at first casually, then regularly, then secretly. She warned him which princes were likely to rebel. She advised him where to station troops. She interpreted envoys' expressions, caught lies others missed, predicted alliances others failed to see. And each time she was correct. Her influence grew quietly, strategically, a vine winding around a structure until one day it becomes the structure. But influence is never free. It attracts envy. Women in the harem began whispering against her. Some accused her of witchcraft. Others insisted she seduced the ruler. One tried to poison her. Another tried to frame her for theft. She survived each attempt with unnerving composure, because she understood the truth. Power in a palace is not protected by guards. It is protected by perception. The more they attacked her, the more the court noticed she did not retaliate, earning her sympathy, respect, and eventually fear. Then came the event that changed everything. A rebellion erupted in the western provinces. The ruler asked his council how to respond. Generals argued. Advisors fought. Strategies contradicted one another. She stepped forward and suggested a plan, one that used the rebels' geography against them, cutting off their supplies and forcing surrender without a prolonged siege. It worked flawlessly. The ruler summoned her again, but this time he did not speak as conqueror to captive. "You think like a queen," he said. "I am one," she answered quietly, "even if history chooses not to remember it." He stared at her for a long time, not with desire, not with anger, but with recognition. From that moment, she became necessary. Her role expanded. She oversaw correspondence, interpreted politics, supervised gifts exchanged with foreign courts. She became the unofficial guardian of the heir she had saved. She shaped decisions that shaped cities she would never see. And through all of this, she never forgot who she was. The world believed she had been erased. They were wrong. She had simply moved to a place where power was harder to see. She did not rule, but without her, those who ruled would fail. This was not vengeance. This was reclamation. Her dynasty would not return, but she would ensure that no queen after her disappeared without trace. And as her influence grew, something unthinkable began to happen. Foreign envoys bowed to her. Generals consulted her. Princes feared her. Even the ruler deferred to her judgment. The conquered queen had become the quiet architect of an empire. History loves conquerors. It loves men who burn cities, redraw maps, and carve their names into stone. But in the dim halls behind the throne, another kind of power lived, one without banners, without armies, without chronicles to immortalize it. It lived in women like her, women who endured captivity, women who learned the language of their oppressors, women who studied courts like battlefields, women who rose quietly, strategically, invisibly, until their influence outlived the men who conquered them. History rarely recorded their names, not because they were unimportant, but because men feared what acknowledging them would mean, that empires were not held together by swords, they were held together by women who had been swallowed by them. The queen of our story never returned to her homeland. She never reclaimed her throne. She never marched with an army or wielded the weapons of vengeance. Her triumph was different, colder, deeper. She shaped an empire from within, guided its heirs, prevented wars, ended famines, and stabilized succession crises that could have torn the realm apart. She did not erase the tragedy of her captivity. She transformed it into something else. A warning, a legacy, a truth whispered across centuries. Empires rise through violence, but they survive through women who adapt, who endure, who refuse to let their stories be the closing act of a conquered world. Some queens died when their cities fell. Others were forgotten in captivity. But a few, the rarest few, became rulers in the shadows, and though history may not speak their names, its quietest truths were shaped by their hands.